A Viking man once killed his own brother over an insult so subtle that modern historians argue about what it actually meant. Another was declared legally dead, not killed but socially erased for refusing a duel. A third was burned alive in his house by his neighbors, and the community considered it justice. What could make an entire society turn on someone so completely? The answer is honor, but not honor as we understand it today. Viking honor was a complex, brutal social currency that determined whether you lived or died, whether your family thrived or was destroyed, whether your name was remembered or deliberately forgotten. And there were specific calculated ways to lose it, some obvious, some shockingly petty. Let's break down every single way a Viking could destroy their reputation, status, and future, because understanding this reveals how their entire society actually worked. The fastest way to lose honor was through NID, and this concept doesn't have a clean English translation. Need means something like insult or shame, but those words are too weak. It was a specific type of moral degradation that questioned your fundamental worth as a person, and certain accusations carried automatic NID that could destroy you. The most devastating? Being called Argar or Ragur, terms implying you'd taken the receptive role in homosexual sex. This wasn't about sexuality as we understand it, it was about dominance and submission. Vikings didn't care much about who you had sex with, but they cared obsessively about power dynamics. Being accused of sexual submission meant being labeled as fundamentally passive, weak, and unmanly. This accusation was so serious that it justified immediate violence. If someone called you Argar publicly, you had legal grounds to kill them on the spot. If you didn't respond with violence, the accusation was assumed true, and your honor was destroyed. You'd be socially exiled, unable to testify in legal proceedings, and your family would carry the shame. Cowardice in battle was similarly catastrophic. Vikings didn't expect everyone to be a great warrior, but they expected everyone to fight when required. Running from battle, abandoning your comrades, or showing fear too openly could mark you permanently. Sagas tell stories of men who survived battles but were treated as dead by their communities afterward because they'd fled. But here's where it gets interesting. The definition of cowardice was flexible and often manipulated. Political rivals could reframe your tactical retreat as cowardice. A failed raid could be blamed on one person's supposed fear. Honor wasn't just about what you did, it was about how others interpreted your actions. This created a society where perception mattered more than reality, and controlling the narrative about your behavior was a survival skill. Oath-breaking was another honor killer, but the rules around it were more complicated than you'd think. Vikings took oaths constantly. Oaths of loyalty to leaders, oaths to support allies, oaths to settle disputes, oaths to gods. Breaking an oath was considered one of the most serious offenses possible because Norse society ran on trust networks. Without enforceable contracts or strong central authority, your word was the only guarantee of your future behavior. If you broke an oath, you became oath-broken, a status that made you essentially untouchable in the bad way. People wouldn't trade with you, wouldn't fight alongside you, wouldn't marry into your family. You became legally unreliable, and in a society built on reputation, that was social death. But Vikings were pragmatic about this. They understood that circumstances changed, that oaths sometimes conflicted, that impossible situations arose, so there were workarounds. You could be released from an oath by the person you'd sworn it to. You could negotiate new terms. You could even break an oath if you had sufficiently good reasons, but you'd need to convince the community that your reasons were legitimate. The sagas are full of debates about whether specific oath breakings were justified. Did this man break his oath, or did changing circumstances release him from it? Was he dishonorable, or was he adapting reasonably to new information? These weren't abstract philosophical questions. They determined whether someone kept their social standing or lost everything. Refusing hospitality could also destroy your honor, which seems minor but was actually profound. Vikings practiced extreme hospitality. You were obligated to feed, house, and protect travelers who sought shelter. Refusing this without good reason marked you as mean-spirited, ungenerous, and antisocial. Why did this matter so much? Because Viking society depended on mutual aid networks. You might need hospitality tomorrow. Your kinsman might need help next month. Refusing to participate in these reciprocal obligations made you a parasite, taking from the community without contributing. And parasites were dealt with harshly. Then there were the situational honor killers, behaviors that destroyed you only in specific contexts, but when they hit hard. Losing a Holmgang, a ritualized duel, could devastate your reputation, especially if you lost badly or refused to fight. A Holmgang existed partly to settle disputes, but mostly to publicly demonstrate courage and fighting ability. If you were challenged and declined, you were admitting inferiority. If you accepted and were humiliated, everyone witnessed your inadequacy. Some men hired champions to fight Holmgangs for them, which was legal but carried its own reputational costs. You were essentially admitting you couldn't defend yourself. For a Carl trying to maintain status or a Jarl trying to project strength, this could be politically disastrous. Being unable to pay debts was another context-specific specific disaster. Vikings operated on credit systems. You might borrow resources for a trading voyage or a farm expansion, promising to repay after your harvest or return. Failing to repay made you unreliable and poor, neither of which helped your honor. But the social response depended on why you couldn't pay. If you'd been unlucky, your ship sank, your crops failed due to weather, people might be sympathetic and extend you more time. If you'd been foolish, made bad decisions, wasted resources, failed through incompetence, you'd lose honor and credibility. The community had to judge your character based on your failure. Accepting insults without response was perhaps the strangest honor killer to modern eyes. If someone insulted you publicly, your courage, your lineage, your wife's faithfulness, your masculinity, you were expected to respond. Not responding meant accepting the insult as true, but the required response wasn't always violence. Sometimes a clever verbal comeback was sufficient. Sometimes demanding compensation worked. Sometimes challenging them to legal proceedings at the thing was appropriate. The key was responding proportionally and publicly, demonstrating you wouldn't accept disrespect. This created exhausting social dynamics where men constantly monitored each other for potential insults and had to calibrate their responses carefully. Too weak and you looked passive. Too aggressive and you looked uncontrolled. The most complex honor killers involved family and kinship obligations because these could trap you in impossible situations. Failing to avenge a murdered kinsman destroyed your honor and your family's honor. Norse culture demanded blood vengeance. If your brother was killed, you were obligated to kill his murderer or extract compensation. Refusing to do so marked you as weak and marked your entire family as targets. If they won't avenge their own, who will respect them? But this created brutal dilemmas. What if the murderer was your friend? What if avenging your kinsman meant attacking someone more powerful who'd destroy you? What if pursuing vengeance would bankrupt your family or leave your children unprotected? The sagas document men paralyzed by these conflicts, trying to navigate between incompatible obligations. Some found creative solutions, accepting massive compensation instead of blood, arranging marriages to merge families, pursuing legal solutions. Others were broken by the impossible choices, losing honor regardless of what they chose. Marrying poorly could damage honor in gender-specific ways. For men, marrying a woman from a dishonorable family or a woman with a reputation for infidelity reflected badly on your judgment and status. For women, marrying beneath your family's status or being married off without proper bride price could indicate your family didn't value you, which damaged everyone's honor. And here's the disturbing part. Women could lose honor through sexual activity in ways men couldn't. A woman who had sex outside marriage, even if raped, could lose honor, making her unmarriageable and damaging her family's reputation. This wasn't universal and responses varied, but the double standard was real and cruel. The sagas show some women who maintained or rebuilt honor after sexual assault by loudly demanding justice, forcing the community to acknowledge them as victims rather than shameful. But it required extraordinary strength to fight against social presumptions. So why does any of this matter beyond historical curiosity? Because Viking honor culture reveals something important about how reputation-based societies function. And we're living in one right now. Social media operates on honor dynamics that Vikings would recognize instantly. Your reputation is public, constantly evaluated, and can be destroyed through accusations that may or may not be true. Responding to attacks is mandatory, but over-responding makes you look weak. Silence is interpreted as guilt. The Vikings didn't have courts that could enforce justice reliably, so they used honor as a social control mechanism. We have courts, but in many contexts, online spaces, professional networks, social communities, formal justice is unavailable or too slow. So we've recreated honor dynamics, often without realizing it. Understanding how Vikings lost honor shows the psychological brutality of reputation-based systems. You're never secure. Your status must be constantly defended. Every interaction is potentially a test. Ambiguous situations can destroy you if others interpret them badly. And sometimes there are no good choices. Every option damages you somehow. The Vikings who killed themselves over insults, who burned down houses over slights, who pursued blood feuds that destroyed entire families, they weren't crazy. They were navigating a system where honor was survival, where reputation determined whether you could function in society at all. We've built somewhat gentler systems since then, but the underlying dynamics remain. Reputation still matters. Public perception still shapes opportunities. Accusations still spread faster than truth, and people still face impossible choices between competing obligations, knowing that whatever they choose will make someone think less less of them. The Viking honor system was more honest about these dynamics than we are. They acknowledged explicitly what we pretend isn't happening, that society is a brutal competition for status, that your worth is determined by others' opinions, and that maintaining your place requires constant vigilance against those who tear you down. Maybe that honesty was worse, or maybe it was better than our pretense that merit matters more than perception. Either way, those Vikings fighting desperately to maintain honor weren't fighting for abstract principles. They were fighting for survival in the only form their society recognized: